huh? Oh, okay. Really?
Mics are on.
Interesting can. Oh.
No, it's not. It's a.
Okay, I'm going to call the Human Affairs Committee to order on August 20th at 7 p.m. here in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman June Karen, present, but, absent. Alderman Patricia Clee,
Here.
Alderwoman Marianne Malizi Goji,
Goya.
Goya, I know. And Alderman Linda Harry Gaffner, present, and our chairperson, Laurie Wilshire.
Here.
And also in attendance, we have Alderman Tom Lopez and Carrie Schema from Managers Urban Programs, and Robert Tourney of NeighborWorks.
Okay, thank you very much. First item on the agenda is public comment. Seeing none. Communications? We have none. New business resolutions.
R-18-065, relative to the acceptance and appropriation of $43,456 from the United States Department of Justice into police grant activity, 2017 Justice Assistant Grant, multi-jurisdictional.
Alderwoman Malizi Goya.
Yes, I would move for final passage, to recommend final passage.
Motion before us is to recommend final passage of resolutions is 18065. This is a grant that the National Police Department goes after. It's the JAG Justice Assistance Grant. The grant writer, Bill Adamson, could not be with us tonight, but he did send me a little blurb, and I will just read it into the record. The JAG grant assists in covering overtime costs related to officers attending community events, crime prevention meetings, conducting random sex offender checks, and the National Police Department's Citizens Academy. The grant also provides funding for non-budgeted conferences and training, non-budgeted law enforcement equipment purchases, and funds the Rape Aggression Defense Program. The grant is a federal pass-through. In the past, the grant has covered fringe benefits for overtime costs. However, this is no longer covered under the terms and conditions of the grant. Mrs. Karen Smith is aware of this and will be working with the city and the police department to cover those costs. Discussion. Alderman Lopez.
I just want to observe that it's most likely that when they say to cover overtime costs to engage in community events, they mean outreach events under their own, to meet their own needs. Because I know a number of communities have reached out to me asking, why are police officers so expensive? And I'm like, because you want a safe event. But I just figured I would comment and point out this is probably not to cover things like farmers market or block parties or whatever. It's more outreach activities.
Correct. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, the motion before us is to recommend final passage of Resolution 1865. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Next, we have Resolution 18071.
Relative to the appropriation of U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Home Investment Partnership Program funds to NeighborWorks of Southern New Hampshire.
Alderwoman Malizi Goya.
Yes, I would move to recommend final passage of our 18071.
Motion is to recommend final passage. We have Carrie Schema here from Urban Programs and Robert Turney from NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire. Would you care to join us? Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. Can you give the committee the briefing on this?
Sure. I'll give the kind of the technical background and then let Robert answer any questions specifically related to what will happen at the properties. But basically, these are two properties that were previously home funded, and one is at the corner of Ledge and McLaren Streets, and the other is 34 Central, which is on the corner of Central and Ash. They both have dual addresses. It's only two properties, though. And they've been in the portfolio for quite some time. They've satisfied the minimum HUD affordability periods and have come to a point where they're in need of rehab again. And so NeighborWorks approached us discussing whether or not there were home funds available to do that. And what's good about these projects and working with NeighborWorks is that it will also use up some of our CHODO money because NeighborWorks qualifies as that type of entity, which I've talked about before. It stands for Community Housing Development Organization. And it's a very specific type of nonprofit that HUD has a long list of criteria for them to qualify. And it's basically an organization with a focus in doing affordable housing. And it's more of a small niche. And HUD requires 15% of our home grant each year be set aside to go to those types of organizations. It's my understanding that it was so that the big developers aren't coming in and using up all the home funds and not giving the smaller local nonprofits a chance. That's not really what we see in Nashua, but nationwide, that was the intent. The CHODO funds, because they're so specific, sometimes it's difficult to find an entity with a project in time to meet our commitment. We have a 2-year commitment. From when we get the funds, we have to commit it within 2 years. So it was timely that this request came in, and we are working through the actual application to do all the underwriting still at this point, but we wanted to get the legislation piece of it rolling. We'll have to complete an environmental review if it's approved and cross all those T's and dot all those I's before committing funds. But we hope to be able to do that near the end of September and then get rolling on the projects. So I'll let Robert explain a little bit about the properties, and one of them they just recently acquired, so that may be of interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, I'm Robert Turney with NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire, and thank you for the opportunity to come before the city tonight and seeking additional home funds. And it's been great to partner with the city of Nashua in our work in Nashua to try to redevelop some of the properties in the Tree Streets neighborhood specifically. And so as Carrie mentioned, we've owned the properties at Central and Ash now for a few years. They were developed by another nonprofit developer and handed over to us, and we've been continuing to maintain and operate them. But as a very small 2-unit project, it really doesn't generate the kind of cash flow and reserves that you would normally need to make major capital improvements over time. And so basically it's been holding the building together, holding those units together and continuing to operate them while putting together a list of what is needed for capital needs. More recently, beginning of April, we acquired 8 more units in partially fronting Ledge Street, but on McLaren Street. And those were developed by a for-profit developer quite a few years ago, and were financed through New Hampshire Housing and the city of Nashua. And so we recently acquired those properties as well. And so now we're starting to build a little bit of a portfolio and develop, identify what those capital needs are for those properties. And I expect that we'll ultimately be going back to New Hampshire Housing for refinancing and for additional capital to do more major capital improvements. But for now, we have a list of about $220,000 worth of primarily exterior repairs and things that will improve the appearance of the property. We need to do some new roofs and siding and doors and key entries. We do need to repair the laundry room and porches and railings and some exterior landscaping and that sort of work. So anyway, we'd like to move forward with those capital needs, and if we could utilize the additional home funds, that would be terrific. And to just follow up on the Community Housing Development Organization piece, the CHODO piece, having access to CHODO funds for an organization like ours it's just so important because it's the most sort of flexible resources that we can use to give us the opportunity to do this kind of work and to make this investment and essentially preserve affordable housing. I was mentioning to the alderman before the meeting that I've never seen a housing market like the situation that we're in, where homeownership demand is at an all-time high, rental housing demand is at an all-time high, and as a result, vacancy rates are at an all-time low, and occupancy rates are at an all-time high. So that means that rental units just aren't available, and those that are very expensive. So for us to be in a position to be able to preserve housing and continue its affordability for the long term, I think is important for us as well as it is for the city and for consumers. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, we do know that there is a shortage in this city of affordable housing, so thank you for continuing to be part of that solution. Questions from the committee? Alderman Lopez.
Well, so I have a question, but I'm going to start with a statement that I wanted to just come here tonight, particularly to support this. It's important for, as Robert said, the NeighborWorks has been getting more and more involved with the tree streets. There need to be more owner-occupied housing, affordable housing, and low-income housing units available. So I was excited when I saw this. I also believe NeighborWorks just purchased another property or obtained another property from the city.
We're in the process of trying to acquire a couple of properties from the city. One's, I think, tied up in some engineering right now, but working on that PNS, and then hopefully moving forward on another property as well. So yeah, hopefully 2 more in the neighborhood soon, very soon.
So, like I said, I was just coming in support of it. But I did have a question from Ms. Schema. The home funds, or no, the Chodo funds that you were talking about, does Habitat for Humanity utilize those?
Carrie?
Thank you. Habitat for Humanity, as it stands, doesn't qualify as a CHOTA. We've had discussions with them, but because of the makeup of their board, one of the major criteria of the board is that there's 1/3 representation from the low-income community. And HUD has clarified over the years, it used to be that, if somebody worked in a neighborhood that was considered low-income, they could be considered that low-income person on a board, but they've come out with guidance over the years where they said they really want that to either be a resident from a low-income neighborhood, somebody that is actually low-income, or a truly appointed representative. So if there were a neighborhood group of sorts, that they could appoint somebody to be their spokesperson. So the way the current board stands with Habitat, it doesn't meet that criteria, and that's for them really the biggest holdback, and they would have to revamp their entire, I don't think charter is the right word, you probably know it better,
bylaws,
the
yeah.
bylaws, thank you, to change that, and they have to have a method for getting input from the low-income community as well.
I know it could be a challenge because we tried to do that last year, and I pushed pretty strongly for using that exact definition, and it was not passed by the aldermen. But I was wondering who does use those funds, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to step on NeighborWorks' game. Like, I'm trying to imagine what other organizations operate that, and if this is something that we annually have to contribute to a specific cause, who does it?
Carrie?
So we've also worked with Southern New Hampshire Services. They've qualified in the past. And the other piece that has changed in the last few years is it used to be that an agency would sort of apply for CHODO status and, just reissue paperwork each year to stay certified. The way we have to do it now is it's based on the project. So depending on the capacity that the entity wants to be, if they're going to be the owner of the project, they have to have that in-house capacity to own property and manage it. If they're just going to be the developer or if they're going to sponsor it. So we have to evaluate each project and the role that the agency wants to take in that project, in addition to all of the criteria that HUD says the agency has to meet. Again, the board is a big thing, but there's also financial standards and other operating standards. But we have worked with Southern New Hampshire. We've had conversations with a few other entities in town because it is something that, only having 2 agencies, and at different times we've had none. We've been here discussing the fact that we had no CHOTOs. It is tight for the city because of that 2-year commitment. So we've been fortunate that we've been able to meet that commitment every time. And what's nice about this project is it's tying up the ones that are due to expire, which are the fiscal year 17. It's also going to allocate the fiscal year 18 and then the 19 funds that are coming in. So it'll give us a little bit of breathing room until the next time we're up against a commitment deadline, unless Congress changes it between now and then. So we do have those conversations with other agencies at different times, but because sometimes it would cause them to change their mission or their bylaws, it's just not something they want to take on.
Well, thank you, NeighborWorks, for needing money.
Certainly. If I could just follow up for a moment, I know maintaining that CHDO designation is really important to us. I mean, our organization was actually chartered 7 years ago with that 1/3 representation of the population that we serve. And so it was a natural fit for us to become a CHOTA when HUD came up with that designation. And I suspect there must have been some fraud or something occurring somewhere in the country in the last few years, because HUD has really cracked down on the monitoring and the compliance on the CHOTA stuff, CHOTA designation materials, because I know that we've had to provide very in-depth details for our designation, and so we're happy to do so.
So a lot of red tape, but you're willing to do the work. Good
That's
for
what she
you.
does.
Alderwoman Melissa Goya.
Thank you. Robert, I just want to thank you. I remember when NeighborWorks first came before us and you were coming into the city and your first block party over in the Tree Streets. And I just want to thank you for all of the work your organization has done in the city.
Thank you. Hope to continue to do more, so thank you very much.
We hope so, too.
Yeah.
Anything further? Motion before us is to recommend final passage of Resolution 1871. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Thank you very much, both
Thank
of
you
you.
very much.
Thank
I
you for being
appreciate
here.
that.
Have a good evening.
Keep forgetting
too.
we can't vote.
Okay, new business ordinances, we have none. General discussion. Public comment. Remarks by Alderman. No need for a non-public. Do I have a motion? Alderwoman Melissa Goya.
Move to adjourn.
Motion before us is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. We are adjourned at 7:17. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I remember not to vote that time, and I feel like the vote was a little bit lacking. Lacking, yeah. So this is a better housing plan than the other one I have. Richard's like, hey, you think a whole bunch of people will be excited about one on Fairmont?